Hey everyone. Today's lecture represents something new, something controversial, something countercultural, and what I believe is truly a funny phenomenon that has occurred within the Western world. For today's lecture, we're going to look at a new classification of religion that has emerged since the 1960s, but has really gotten really popular in the early 2000s in response to the rise of the religious right in Western politics. So today, we are going to look at parody religions. And so you might be kind of puzzled at the title of this lecture, the puzzled at the idea of what a parody religion is, and that's okay because we're going to talk about it. So, what a parody religion is that it's sometimes referred to as a mock religion, and it refers to a peculiar and often controversial phenomenon that occupies a in-between space between satire and social commentary. Parody religions are a mock belief system that challenges the spiritual convictions of others while emphasizing having fun. But the reason that they're important is because of what they do. Parody religions offer a convenient excuse for social interactions, but also they're characterized, overwhelmingly characterized, by their overt absurdity, by their challenging of traditional notions and conversations and thoughts about religion. And thus, it is why I wanted to include this in our conversation, not only because I just think it's absolutely hilarious to read this text, to study about parody religions, because I just find it quite humorous. But more importantly, the reason we're studying them is because of this, because of the challenge that they force society to think about in terms of religion. And so, thus, this is a religious studies class. This is a world religion studies class. Ergo, I think it should be included. At the core of parody religions is this intentional exaggeration or this intentional distortion or a clear imitation of an already established world religion. So, how they function, how they operate, is heavily dependent upon the definition of a parody. So, what is a parody? Well, a parody is a purposeful imitation of either the style of a particular writer, an artist, a voice, or a genre with the deliberate intentions of exaggerating their characteristics, their styles, for the purpose of comedic effect, for a joke, for a laugh. But more importantly, what a parody also does is a social commentary on culture. So when I say parody, you might think of people like Weird Al Yankovic and his very popular parody songs, or you might think of Saturday Night Live, who are famous for their parodies of famous actors, famous politicians, famous people from history, sketches that go viral regarding cultural events. Or you might think of, from my generation, the famous Austin Power movies by Mike Myers. You can see in all of these examples, they are not only just comedic for comedic's sake, comedic in their composition, but they also function as a social commentary on the subjects that they're parodying. So, for example, Weird Al. Weird Al parodies, he got famous for parodying many of the popular 1980s songs of the day, specifically Michael Jackson and Madonna. And he was primarily satirizing consumerism, and that characterized much of the 1980s lifestyle in America. So you might remember the 1987 famous movie Wall Street with Charlie Sheen and Michael Douglas. And for here, Michael Douglas's famous proclamation in the film, where he says, "Greed is good." That too was a parody, a social commentary of the 1980s. Consumerism is greed. And for the country to exist, this country was very much existing on consumerism for our market interests and for our economy. And so for our economy to keep booming, we need greedy people. We need us to keep consuming and consuming. Or you can look at the Austin Power films, again, from my generation. They not only were designed to make fun of the 1960s and 70s spy movies like James Bond, but more importantly, they were a commentary on the changing societal values and structures that had emerged in the early 2000s. And so if you're not familiar with the film, it was written and starred and directed by Michael Myers. Michael Myers, not the killer from the Halloween movies, but the comedic, the Canadian comic Mike Myers, who's famous for Shrek, his being the ogre in Shrek. This was a very popular movie that he did where he was making fun of James Bond films, but making fun of 1960s and 70s style ideas of manhood. What does it mean to be a man? It meant to be adventurous. It meant to be sexually appealing and very sexually active, okay with drug consumption. And so the story of the film is that this is this very famous spy who is able to defeat evil, but agrees to go and be frozen in time so that whenever evil reemerges, he will reappear as well and defeat evil. But he emerges in the 2000s, and as the movie goes along, he's woefully out of context all the time. It's awkward, ergo, it's funny, but primarily it's a social commentary, showing how out of touch these ideas from the 1960s and 70s are within the 2000 world. So the films are a social commentary. Parodies, they employ very much, well, parodies, let me specify, parodies in religion. They employ very familiar tropes, familiar rituals, and even the language of traditional faith in order to create a imitation for a comic effect, but also for a critical effect. And this mimicry serves as a vehicle for exploring societal norms, questioning religious dogma, and provoking critical thought about religion, the place religion has in our society, and the control that religion has over society. And by presenting a distorted mirror to the established religions and to culture, what parody religions do is that they invite us to examine the underlying assumptions and contradictions of belief systems. They subsequently force us to ask ourselves, why do I believe this? Why do I give so much authority to religion over my life, to over my society? So from my comments here, you can see why and how these parody religions have emerged. They've really emerged as a countercultural movement. And really quickly here, what I mean by a countercultural movement, I mean a belief which stands in opposition to the conventional principles and norms of a society. So, for example, think of your US history and think of the countercultural movements of the 1960s. It was both a cultural phenomenon, hippies, but it was also a political movement which sought for the civil rights of our African American brothers, the civil rights for women in society, the rights of human sexuality, all cultural phenomenons. But at the same time, they were also protesting the Vietnam War, protesting American politics of the day. It was both, again, a cultural phenomenon, but a political movement regarding culture. But if you look at religious history, many of the established world religions of today, they really had their roots and emerged as countercultural movements in reaction to their own culture, their own periods of time for which they existed in. Buddhism, for example, was the rejection of the old Vedic religion of India during the 6th century BCE, where that salvation was highly restricted to ritual practices. It was controlled by a priestly caste that had power and sway over society. There was hundreds and thousands of gods that constantly needed appeasement, but their appeasement can only be through ritual practices that were controlled by the priesthood. The Buddha upended that by saying, there is no God. There's only you. There's only us. And thus salvation now becomes individualized. It is your duty, your job to save yourself. That's a countercultural movement. Another example, China, Confucianism and Taoism. Those two things emerged as countercultural movements to the Warring State period of Chinese history, where society was crumbling because of the constant state of warfare and that society was collapsing. Confucius wanted to reform society, reform culture, reform the way government functions. Countercultural. Lao Tzu of Taoism, he wanted to just completely abandon it. Not even start over again, just abandon everything altogether. That's countercultural. Something a little bit closer to home, Christianity. Christianity was the rejection of Greco-Roman religions and culture, as well as the rejection of Judaism, older forms of Judaism in the 1st century CE. Islam was the rejection of not just only Arab paganism, but it was also the rejection of Trinitarian Christianity that was being actively debated within the church for 3 centuries prior to the emergence of the prophet. It had seen the church be torn apart between Trinitarians and non-Trinitarians, between Orthodox and Catholic, to Nestorian Christians. Muhammad emerged in that time frame. Islam is very much a reaction to those Christological debates because it has a very clear, strong interpretation and claim about Jesus and Mary that runs countercultural to the Catholic and Orthodox Church. Sikhism is another example. It's a rejection of a false dichotomy that was created between choosing, am I Hindu or a Muslim? If you recall from our lecture, what did Guru Nanak said? He had one revolutionary vision where he encountered God, and God only said this simple sentence: there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim, God is one. And so, even though these parody religions are glorified jokes of and against the established religions of today, they are also countercultural movements in the very same vein, in the very same spirit as Buddhism and all of these other world religions that we mentioned above. And I think it is the reason why we and why I would like us to labor in discussing and examining these parody religions. But what are these parody religions countering? Well, a great example of answering this question is our main topic for today. And instead of talking about all parody religions, I thought it was important to just focus only on one. And for our topic today, we're going to be focusing on the parody religion of Pastafarianism. And yes, this is a real thing. You can pause the video now, start Googling it on your phones while I continue lecturing. This is real. This is not a joke. I promise you, this is an absolutely real thing. So, what are the origins of Pastafarianism? Well, Pastafarianism is a humorous parody religion that emerged as a protest against the teaching of intelligent design in the public school system of the United States. And is centered around the belief in a satirical, invisible, supreme creator deity known as the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Or sometimes you might hear me say FSM. And yes, this is an artist's rendering of what the Spaghetti Monster looks like. But however, he's invisible. You can't see him, so we really don't know. But this is according to the sacred texts of this religion, what the FSM really looks like. And so this specific parody religion is also known as the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. So you can search either terms. You'll see this Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster come up a lot. They're equivalent to each other. And its members of this movement are known as Pastafarians. And this is a play on words of a real world religion that's found in Jamaica and among the diasporan Jamaicans around the globe, known as Rastafarianism. Rast with an R. So you might see Rastafarianism emerge as well when you're Googling Pastafarianism, and that's why it's a play on words with a real world religion. Again, parodies, imitation. So you'll see this over and over again as we discuss this. And while the parody religion first emerged in the early 2000s, around 2005, so it's a relatively young and relatively new parody religious movement kind of thing. According to recent survey data prior to the pandemic, so 2019, Pastafarianism's claimed a worldwide membership of over 3 million followers. So think about that. Let that sit in. 3 million followers. If we were to take this seriously, this parody religion as a real thing, and if we were to compare it and put it on a list and rank it among other world religions today, Pastafarianism would rank somewhere on between 7 and 8 on the scale of world religions among followers. There are more Pastafarians than there are Jews in the world today. That's that's crazy to think about. That's ridiculous. But I just wanted to mention that. So what are its roots? Well, the roots and origins of this parody religion start with an American named Bobby Henderson. Now, even though Pastafarianism can very loosely, extremely loosely, be classified as a founder religion. And if you remember our definition of a founder religion, it is a religious tradition that is based on the teachings of a specific individual or individuals. So that definition would apply here. But however, for a founder religion, uh, like Pastafarianism, we really know nothing about Bobby except for the events around the origins of this tradition. That's about it. Bobby is not a very active individual amongst the Pastafarian movement after it pretty much got started and got off the ground running. He wisely, I think, stepped away. And he lives a very quiet life and kind of a life off the grid. I'm sure if you dig some digging in Instagram and Facebook, or digging some digging deep in the web, you might find him and his activities today. But he really has kept secluded. I think the last post I remember reading about him was from 2012, where he was living in the Philippines. And I think he had come back to the United States, but he's really not involved in this parody religion hardly anymore, even though he is the founder and credited, and much of his sayings and statements during the early days are considered canonical scripture within this group. He's not very active within it. He enjoys his privacy. And so it's for that reason why many people would not classify Pastafarianism as a founder religion, because the guy is still alive and he's not actively the leader of this parody religious movement. But for the purposes of our class, we're going to classify it as a parody religion because it does fit our very, very basic definition of what a founder religion is all about. But all we do know about Bobby prior to the birth of this religious tradition was that he was a recent graduate from Oregon State University, where he majored in physics, and I assume was wanting to be a high school teacher or be a university professor. I'm not sure. But what we do know is that, like many other Americans during the 2000s elections, probably very much so the 2004 election, Bobby became very frustrated with the political debate regarding what should be taught in the classroom. Now, just saying that makes me think about the same debate that's going on in our generation now. The what to be taught in the classroom is still a hot button issue. Now it's shifted to critical race theory and slavery and American history or homosexuality. But that debate is still going on. But for Bobby's, it was a very much different debate. It was the debate concerning creation and evolution. How should these things be taught in our public schools? Internationally, biological theories of evolution were taught and are being taught in scientific classrooms with little to no controversy. The only exceptions internationally are several Islamic states, which makes sense. Islam is in many of these states is there is no separation of church and state, and sometimes elements of the religion run various degrees of the state. So it makes sense why evolution is debated. But the other significant outlier on these lists is the United States. Until the end of the 19th century and even early 20th century, creationism, as told by the Christian Bible, was universally taught as scientific fact throughout the United States. You can look at textbooks, books from this period of time in the classrooms up until the 1920s. This was the standard view of most Americans of the day. And what do I mean by creationism? Well, creationism is a good definition of it is a pseudoscience and religious belief, typically based on a literal interpretation of the creation story in the book of Genesis, that the universe and its inhabitants were created by a divine creator deity. That's creationism. And that was the view of the scientific community to a part up until Charles Darwin. In 1859, the English biologist Charles Darwin published his most famous work, On the Origins of Species, which cemented evolutionary science as a explanatory theory for the origins of the universe with empirical observational fact to sustain it. Darwin's ideas cemented the scientific community's thoughts going on at the time. And very quickly, his view of creation became the dominant view of science. And it wasn't until after the Civil War in the United States that we begin to see Darwinian evolution being taught and appearing in the college campuses, in the universities. And even as late as 1880s, we start seeing it appearing in the seminaries, where religious ministers and religious priests are being trained for service. But it's important to note that not everyone accepted Darwin's theory of evolution. An emergence of what is known as Christian fundamentalism arose in direct response to Darwin evolutionary. It first appeared in the Presbyterian Church in the 1880s and spread to the Baptist Church by the 1890s. And the Christian fundamentalist movement sought to actively combat what they called, quote unquote, modernism in the United States and in the Western world. So, what do I mean by Christian fundamentalism? Well, Christian fundamentalism refers to both a religious and then later a cultural movement, which emphasizes the principle of biblical literalism. So, what do I mean by biblical literalism? Biblical literalism is a belief that the Bible should be interpreted literally, meaning word for word, unless it is clearly poetic, figurative speech, or allegorical. So, a great example would be the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Biblical literalism would say those events should be taught as literal, word for word, that they're not poetic, they're not figurative, they're not allegorical. However, there are some elements of Christianity that would say no, it should be taught allegorical because Jesus gave the clues where he talked about the sign of Jonah. Jonah being swallowed in a well, or in a fish, a giant fish or a whale, as we tend to think from our childhood, and was spit up 3 days later. That Jesus gives you a clue, or the Gospels writers give you a clue that it's meant to be taken allegorically because Jesus says it. So again, there's some who debate that, and it led to combat. And so that's where emerged Christian fundamentalism and biblical literalism. But the word fundamentalism or a fundamentalist emerged in America, and it actually came from a book, a famous book, a 12-volume book that was published in the 1910s, throughout the 1910s, by A.C. Dixon and Reuben Torrey, and their publication was financed by L.A. millionaire Lyndon Stewart, and the book was called The Fundamentals. And the book was aimed at arming ministers and local church members with the fundamental truths in order to combat liberalism. So those who were carrying this book became known as fundamentalists, and that's where the word stuck from. So a religious conflict was now being waged in America over evolution, and it all came ahead in the 1920s. So between 1922 and 1925, various state legislations and legislators of Kentucky, of South Carolina, of Oklahoma, of Florida, and Tennessee all passed laws prohibiting the teaching of evolution in the classroom, while mandating creationism as the only true form of science to explain our existence. But in 1925, in Dayton, Tennessee, a science teacher named John Scopes famously decided to defy state law and openly taught evolution inside his classroom. Scope was later arrested and put on trial, which the trial became known and really popularized in American history as the Scopes trial. It was so popular that the events of the trial were later turned into a play in 1955, and that play was later turned into a film called Inherit the Wind from the 1960s, starring a great film actor and Tracy Spencer, or Spencer Tracy, sorry. So definitely make sure to catch that film. The Supreme Court, however, of the state of Tennessee ruled against the state. They ruled that the state had violated the Establishment Clause of the Constitution, which read, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. The Supreme Court of the state of Tennessee ruled that the state of Tennessee, by enforcing creationism and simultaneously outlawing evolution, was a clear effort at establishing a religion. And they even go on to name that religion Christianity. And so Scopes famously won his trial and won his appeal. But the battle over creationism and evolutionism was not over. It was not until Epperson versus Arkansas in 1968, so the Scopes trial in 1925, not until 1968 that the U.S. Supreme Court, not the state Supreme Court, but the U.S. Supreme Court, the federal court, ruled that prohibiting the teaching of evolution violated the Constitution. And later in Edwards versus Aguilera in 1987, the U.S. Supreme Court prohibited states from forcing equal time teaching methods, which that included teachers needed to give equal time to evolution and equal time to creation. And so thus they would pair it that I could teach creationism as long as I gave equal time to evolutionism. The Supreme Court ruled against that and said, nope, that violates the Constitution as well. But the fight for biblical literalism appeared to be dead. However, a new attempt began under a new name, and that name of intelligent design. So this all emerged around 1991. A conservative think tank group of the Heritage Foundation established what is known as the Discovery Institute. And the Discovery Institute emerged, and its sole purpose was influencing politicians and educators to advocate for or adopt the teaching of intelligent design in the classroom. So what is intelligent design? Well, intelligent design refers to a scientific theory based on observations of the natural world, which argue that certain biological and cosmological systems are too complex to have evolved through natural processes, as Darwin claims. But instead, this theory implies that this speaks to an intelligent designer behind its complex development. So intelligent design is not necessarily I guess real quick let me explain what it is. I don't think I explained it very well. If I showed you a watch is a very utilitarian, very purposeful element of creation. But it has a lot of complexities. It has gears, it has switches, it has batteries, it has all this, or even now digital watches, wiring, computer chips, semiconductors, all these things. All of this doesn't naturally emerge out of natural selected processes or even just kind of compulsory. It just doesn't emerge out of anywhere. All of these elements point to a creator who had to create the gears, who had to create the sprockets, had to create the switches, had to create the electrical wiring, the semiconductors, and then also arrange them in such a way that the watch will work and function as intentionally designed. Its complexity. A watch is a very complex thing, and so because of its complexity, naturally our conclusion is it didn't happen randomly. It happened by design. And so that's what intelligent design is trying to argue, that the complexities of nature don't lend itself to processes of natural selection or natural evolution, but rather they speak towards an intelligent designer. And so intelligent design is not necessarily creationism, because it's just an intelligent designer. That designer can be an alien. That designer doesn't have to be the god of Christianity. It can be Krishna instead, or Shiva from Hindu. It can be Xenu from Scientology, for all I care. It's relatively vague, and vague on purpose. It's not necessarily creationism, but creationism is an outcome of intelligent design. And intelligent design is often taught as a form of scientific creationism. And intelligent design does not advocate for biblical literalism or even an all-powerful deity, but rather just suggests that there has to be an intelligent other in order to explain these complexities from nature. That's all it does. Intelligent design is not overtly religious in its claim, but it can naturally lead to religious belief. And so that was the way in. And so the Discovery Institute began organizing an active campaign throughout the early 1990s called Teach the Controversy, which aimed to enforce the teaching of intelligent design as well as evolutionary criticism in the U.S. public school system. And the Discovery Institute not only composed curriculum that reflected intelligent design, they also privately financed politicians for the purpose of getting them elected in order to start implementing their curriculum. I'm telling you this because all of this came to a head in 2005. In 2005, the Kansas State Board of Education conducted hearings regarding how science should be taught in the classroom, specifically the debate on science and religion. Prior to this event, it became apparent that Discovery Institute had helped finance the election and the appointment of certain board members in order to gain a 6-4 majority vote on the commission. And with the majority, the Discovery Institute then requested that the Kansas State Board of Education would hold hearings in which their teaching models on science would be showcased in order for adoption. The Kansas State Board issued new standards which would present intelligent design as an alternative to evolution that must be taught in the classroom. It was during one of these public board meetings that Bobby Henderson appears on the stage. Bobby Henderson presented a letter to the Kansas State Board of Education that was read to the general audience, in which he made the following argument: that if intelligent design was to be mandated by the state of Kansas in every classroom under the guise that, quote, evolution itself was not a fact but only a theory, and that intelligent design must be considered as a viable alternative to evolution, end quote, then Bobby's own theory of intelligent design must be considered as well. Bobby then proceeded to lay out his own theory of intelligent design and submitted it for consideration to the community. Bobby then proceeded to produce a satirical view of the intelligent design theory. So naturally, the board just laughed off Bobby's proposal, calling it what it was: satirical, inappropriate. And that was the point. It was a very public stunt and a very public protest done by Bobby Henderson as and other like-minded individuals. The Kansas State Board of Education went ahead and approved the adoption of Discovery Institute's teaching model for the public schools. However, Bobby's proposal hit on an important aspect regarding the nature of religion that I would like to unpack here. and that led to the popularity of his joke becoming mainstream. And a quick side note here, the state of Kansas was later forced to reverse their decision in 2007 because the state was found to have unconstitutionally um, or has broken their constitution. What Bobby presented, or what Bobby's presentation did, as do all parody religions that we can talk about today. I can substitute other ones, but we're going to stick with Pastafarianism here. What it did was that he pointed out one central critique regarding religious cosmology, which refers to a belief. And what I mean by religious cosmology is that it refers to a belief system that explains the origins and evolutions and the eventual fate of the universe from a religious perspective. He points out one central critique regarding religious cosmology in comparison to science. If you can, for a moment, suspend your own religious views and just look at the cosmology offered by a certain religious belief system with an unbiased perspective, you too would question the validity concerning what the religion teaches. So, for example, let us take the biblical story of Noah's flood. The story is used as an explanation and as a pseudo-scientific explanation as to why the dinosaurs became extinct, as an explanation to how the animals survived the flood as well, and whereas the dinosaurs died. For the dinosaurs, sure, a global flood would destroy all the land and all the air dinosaurs, as biblical literalists like Ken Ham would argue. But what about those like the Mosasaurus or the Tylosauruses? Sorry, I have to say this right. Tylosaurus. Yeah, the Tylosaurus. These are two examples of dinosaurs who live in the water. So how did they die from the flood if they live in water? Or another example, let's don't use the dinosaurs. Instead, let's use the sloth. The sloth was collected up in Noah's Ark and survived. But the sloth is only found in Central and South America. It's the only place that's found in the world. But according to the Bible, the ark landed in what is believed to be modern day Turkey, a place called Mount Ararat. How could the sloth get from Turkey to Central and South America? There's no boat. So how did it walk on foot? Or even just think about that, the ability for the sloth to walk. Sloths are incredible slow creatures. The top speed that they have walking on land is about 0.15 miles per hour. And while a sloth can swim, I have seen a sloth swim, their speed is even slower in the water. It's like a 0.07 miles per hour. But if we just took the average time of a three-toed sloth to travel from Mount Ararat to the earliest area where sloths are located into Honduras, it would take a sloth 5.7 years to walk, if he could, from Mount Ararat to Honduras. While that's mathematically possible, however, it's logically impossible. A sloth would be eaten by a jaguar, which is the natural prey of a jaguar. Jaguars live in Honduras. They're traveling back to Honduras, and I'm sure he gets hungry on the way, was to prevent him from just munching on the sloth and eating them. So a lot of this explanations and scientific use of the Bible just don't make sense. And that's what Bobby was asking people in Kansas to examine rationally. There is a difference between science and mythology, and for educational purposes, that distinction should be made clear. But the decision of the Kansas State Board of Education was to muddy the waters, to make that not clear. Bobby was doing also another thing with his presentation. He pointed out another inherent problem of religion, and that is desire for religious conformity. And what do I mean by that? Religious conformity refers to the forced adherence to a particular religious belief system or practice by a government or special group, and it implies that individuals are expected to conform to a specific set of religious doctrines or rituals, even if they do not personally believe in them or want to believe in them. That's religious conformity. If we recall from our discussion of Emil Durkheim, from our religious scholars, what the scholars say about religion lecture, we recall that Durkheim argued that one of the elementary functions of religion is that religion creates communities. It creates a social construct. And if you recall, I pointed out how the Ten Commandments, if you strip away the first three commandments, the other seven are merely community building oriented prescriptions. Thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor. Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt honor thy father and mother. These are all good things to do. And so for Durkheim, what he argues is, you can see here what religion does is religion creates social cohesion through beliefs, through rites. It's an essential element of religion for Durkheim. And I think he's right about that one aspect of religion. Religion creates societies. We have your church, your synagogue, your mosque, your gurdwara. In reality, these are manufactured communities of like-minded individuals. So ergo, religion, by its very nature, wants conformity. And so do the most conservative elements of a religion. And that's what Bobby was pointing out. But he was also reminding that here in the United States, our founding fathers sought to include religious freedom and religious liberty in our Constitution. They saw religious freedom as a fundamental human right for the preservation of individual liberty and autonomy. And they saw religious liberty as that mechanism, and as a mechanism needed to foster a society that will value religious diversity and value religious tolerance, as well as just diversity and tolerance of other races and cultures. And so our founding fathers foresaw the need to keep a separation of religion and the government, because they saw firsthand that religion wants conformity at the expense of individual autonomy. They saw it because they experienced it. Because When they were not separated, when religion and government were not separated, you ended up getting the religious wars of Europe, which consumed much of the 1500s and 1600s that led to over 100 million Europeans dying over one issue: religious conformity. Are you Catholic or are you Protestant? That was it. Depending on how you answered it, you either lived or you died. That was what our founding fathers saw. They saw that was a false assumption. A false assumption regarding this basic equation that social unity and political unity equals religious conformity, and religious conformity then equals social and political unity. That's a false assumption. Instead, what the United States proved is that social unity and political unity emerge from religious diversity. Religious diversity brings about social and political unity. We're a living example of that. Freedom of religion is enshrined in our First Amendment. And so, this effort by the Kansas State Board of Education was really a ploy that Bobby Henderson saw, a ploy to enforce religious conformity on society. That religious conformity was really only the enforcement of one type of religion, Christianity. Because if it was not, and the reason was to just simply have an alternative form of evolution, then Bobby's ideas would have been accepted. But they were rejected because they recognized what they were. They were a parody of Christianity. And so they got offended. They said no. And so that leads me to for us to talk about how this religion emerged and grew. And so it emerged and grew primarily because of an internet phenomenon. As word of Bobby Henderson's challenge to the state of Kansas spread, his vision of the intelligent design theory caught the imagination of the online community. They loved it. Bobby Henderson and his ideas became the #1 searched item on Google for the month of August 2005. Blogs and websites appeared overnight dedicated to Bobby's theory of intellectual design, all designed by just the online community, not him, people that fell in love and recognized what he was doing. And overnight, Bobby and his ideas became an internet sensation. A popular blog site during the early 2000s called Bong Bong, it was our version of Reddit before there was Reddit, challenged its readers to produce empirical evidence that Bobby's theory of intelligent design was not true, and that if somebody could, that the company would award them $1 million reward, and no one could do it. In early 2005, of August of 2005, the Swedish artist Nicholas Jansson was inspired by Bobby Henderson's protest and his joke, and famously created this image that I have here up on the screen. And parody of Michelangelo's creation of Adam, in line with Bobby Henderson's new theory of intelligent design. So you have the flying spaghetti monster there acting as God. So, creating Adam. Hanson's concept and design was such a big success that it even was displayed in many of the most famous museums throughout the world. It was displayed in New York, Chicago, London, Paris, and Copenhagen that year. The New York Times ran a feature article on August 29 of 2005 about Bobby, about his challenge to the State Board of Education, and it even spotlighted his ideas. And thus, because of that article, it was picked up. It was picked up that in the next month by the London Telegraph, and then now across the globe. New Science magazine published series of articles that year regarding Bobby's theory and how they significantly challenged the views on religion and on intellectual design at the debate. The more press Bobby received, the more people reached out to him about his satirical theory and wanted to learn more. Again, he became an internet sensation. And so, in response to that, in March of 2006, Bobby Henderson published his first book, satirically called The Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, which laid out the core tenets of his new parody religion that he entitled Pastafarianism. He sold over 100,000 copies of the book just in 2006 alone, and it was received very well by book critics who recognized what he was doing. They loved it. They called it an elaborate spoof on the intelligent design theory, or just simply that it was a very, very funny book, and which it is. You should read it if you can. It's actually free online nowadays. You can find it online. And funny enough, Henderson's book even inspired a California theatrical group to compose and perform a comedy play about his version of the creation of the world in December of 2006, and drew very large crowds. So again, he's becoming famous, and his ideas are becoming famous. And even though Bobby's theory was both a satirical joke as well as a well thought out protest, thousands of people wanted in on the joke. And so you have next year in 2007, you start having students at the Missouri State University who started a student body group that was dedicated to the the Flying Spaghetti Monster. And the next year, they sponsored the first ever fan convention dedicated to FSM called Skepticon, where people dressed up in costumes based on Henderson's book and descriptions. And the movement eventually outgrew Skepticon. So Skepticon still exists, but now the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster grew outside of that and became its own thing and its own gathering. And at this level of fandom eventually evolved into something else. It started to evolve into a real working religion. And so, sometime in 2007, communities began to organize themselves into groups of people who loved Bobby Henderson's theories and his book. And they began calling themselves the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. At first, they generally organized as groups of concerned citizens who wanted to challenge their local school boards in resisting Discovery Institute's efforts to affect more school districts concerning the teaching of intelligent design in the classroom. The most famous example that I can think of occurred in December of that year when Polk County School Board here in Florida, just outside of Orlando, wanted to adopt the Discovery Institute's curriculum in the classroom, and the local church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster was able to stop the school board from adopting it through protests, through sit-ins, through demonstrations at public events and public hearings. And another example happened much later, and at a university, the University of South Florida. In 2013, they were going to build their Lakeland campus, and the campus was going to be completely dedicated to applied sciences. And the Discovery Institute had heard about it, they learned about it, and then they were able to get the state of Florida's Department of Education to influence the way curriculum was going to be taught at this new campus of applied sciences, and that they got the State Board of Florida to adopt their curriculum and to enforce its curriculum to be taught at South Florida's Lakeland campus. However, the local Church of Flying Spaghetti Monster there learned of the efforts, and they were able to create a large enough protest that got the trustees and the president of USF involved in the efforts to stop it. However, as the movement grew, um, they began to adopt more and more religious characteristics and behaviors. People who wanted to join the church had to undergo religious education, had to undergo catechism, which is religious education, as they would in a Catholic church. People who wanted to be people all of a sudden now could start being ordained and be licensed by the church as ministers, and who were legally able to marry individuals just as a priest or a rabbi could in other countries around the world. They also forced their members to start wearing religious garments just like Jews or Muslims do for their religious traditions. And so very quickly, followers of the Flying Spaghetti Monster sought to expand its challenge to religion beyond the classroom. Many of its members actively sought to garner their local and country to recognize their parody religion as an actual religion, as a recognized religion. And so, very quickly here, the term recognized religion here, it refers to the legal status of a religion in which a government acknowledges and respects the rights of the individual to practice their religious tradition with undue interference. That's what we mean by a recognized religion. So, members of the Flying Spaghetti Monster Church actively sought situations in which they could become a test case. And what a test case is an illegal action whose purpose is to set a precedent in law and to provide a clearer interpretation of the law where there may be some elements of dispute. So they wanted not only to challenge the legal interpretation of freedom of religion, but they were also wanting to challenge how governments define what religion is. And so here I'm going to highlight various ways that followers of the FS movement use the legal system to challenge our culture's definition of religion and the status of freedom of religion. So I'm aware of in 2008, local Pastafarians in Crossville, Tennessee, requested a permit of their local government to place a statue of the Flying Spaghetti Monster in a free speech zone on the courthouse lawn. And while the government initially gave the permit, local townspeople there were very furious and demanded that the statue be removed, as they said it was disgraceful towards religion. They didn't recognize it as being a religion, they recognized it as being a parody. However, the local courts prevented the townspeople from removing it. The local court cited freedom of expression and freedom of belief. And so I just want to stop here for a second. Freedom of belief. The reality here is that here in the United States, you can believe whatever the hell you want to believe. If you want to believe in something like Scientology, you absolutely can. Because it's your belief. Freedom of belief is freedom of opinion. The only time that freedom is stopped is when it crosses from not being your opinion, but being your action against another. And so the local courts were interpreting Pastafarianism and parody religions as just freedom of expression, like comedy, and freedom of belief, just like writing an op-ed paper against your local government. Why you're a Democrat versus Republican or vice versa. You have that freedom to express it, and they were citing these people did as well. But however, the local city board in Crossville decided the way they were going to deal with the local courts and the law was just simply pass a new legislation that would just simply remove and prevent any statue from being erected on the courthouse lawn and remove the free speech zones altogether, which would just eliminate the problem, which it did. Another example that I can think of happened in 2012. A local Pastafarian group in Chester County, PA, which I think is just outside Pennsylvania or Philadelphia, excuse me, petitioned their local county government to permit representation of Pastafarianism on the courthouse lawn during Christmas, where typically you see Christian nativity scenes, or you might see the Jewish menorah being out on the front lawn, maybe some other religious tradition that's going on during that period, you might see as well. And so they wanted to be included as well. The county government refused. And in their refusal letter, they state that only, quote, recognized religions could participate. So clearly they saw Pastafarianism as not a recognized religion, but as a parody. But this got the national media attention. Online petitions were started and created by citizens of Chester County regarding if the image of Pastafarianism could be allowed, and there was overwhelming support to demand that their local government allow the display. But the county government held its ground, citing Pastafarianism as not a true religion, which in turn sparked a debate in America. Well, what is a religion? How do we define what a religion is? So this debate and the legal actions now started to go global as to the status of Pastafarianism as a religion. So in that same year of 2012, I'm aware of another situation in Greece where a man was arrested on charges of, quote, malicious blasphemy, end quote, and offense towards religion for creating a Facebook page for fans of Bobby Henderson and the Flying Spaghetti Monster movement called Elder Pastasosis, which was a parody of a well-known Greek saint, Elder Paiosis. The arrest reached all the way up to Greek parliament at the time, and it led to serious debates and even a public brawl inside the halls of parliament between lawmakers over this issue of, is this satire? Should we be punishing people's non-religious beliefs? Or should we be protecting a person's religious beliefs, even if we disagree with them? I'm aware of next year in Russia, Russian Pastafarians were openly attacked for attending and hosting a public meeting where they were protesting. Well, no, they weren't protesting, actually. They were just having a public meeting, and the members were instead attacked by a Orthodox fundamentalist group in Russia that were called God's Will. The Russian police were called in to interfere. However, the Russian police only arrested the members of the Pastafarian group and charged them with inciting a riot instead, and claimed that they didn't have permits to organize. the fundamentalist group was not charged, but were later actually given medals of commendation for defending the faith. And I'm aware of in 2014 in London, one of the student union groups of a local university there in London, I can't remember which one, but I think City College there in London, was banned by the school for displaying images of the flying spaghetti monster and giving presentations at a student conference on religious studies and religious diversity at the university. But the university was later forced to publicly apologize once the news hit the local newspapers there. And the student group was later allowed to be reinstated following appeals by the Board of Trustees that the university had violated its religious diversity policy. And so they recognized it. They recognized Pastafarian as a different religion. And in that same year, in Tempeln, Germany, local Pastafarians petitioned their local officials to permit signage on the local roads for the Pastafarian church, to display them on the sides of the roads, along with other signs towards churches and mosques in the area, which also included, they would allow them to include public signs for times in which they met. This was done for other churches. Why wasn't it done for them? The town officials agreed. They allowed the local Pastafarians to display their signage, and the city paid for it. However, the regional government there, which is kind of like a state government in Germany, learned of the local city's decision and ordered that the signs actually be torn down and removed, citing, quote, "they are not a religion," and that this would be an offense to other religious traditions in the region, end quote. The local Pastafarians appealed to the ruling to the higher courts, the federal courts there in Germany, and in 2021, the higher courts actually agreed and sided with the Pastafarians and recognized them as a religion, and thus allowed them to post signs stating that they were. But the challenges didn't stop there. Pastafarians also challenged laws about religious clothing. In 2007, Brian Killian was a high school student in North Carolina who was suspended from school for wearing regalia of his confessed, quote, faith in Pastafarianism. Brian dressed up like a pirate. And in Pastafarianism, pirates are greatly valued. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. And so he dressed up as a pirate, but however, the local school district said nope, he had violated a school code. But Brian argued that he won an exemption from this based off religious clothing exemption that Muslim students and Jewish students in the school get as well for not wearing dress code. However, Brian's challenge was denied. He, in the local paper there, he was reported saying that this is what I believe in. No matter how stupid you may think it sounds, I should be able to express my religious belief just like my fellow Muslim students are allowed to express their religious beliefs. And while Brian's incident did get some regional coverage in North Carolina, like I remember it, he was unable to get national attention, and the local movement was not able to get the local government to bend. In 2011, Nico Alm challenged the Austrian government regarding the presence of Pastafarian religious garment on official government ID. Nico needed a new passport, image to be present. And so under Austrian law, it allowed for religious people to wear religious garment. Well, it permitted, that's the better word, it permitted religious garment to be present during an official photo. So if you were Muslim and you wanted to wear the hijab, you could, because it was part of your religious garment. If you were Jewish and wanted to wear the yarmulke, you could. And so Nico wanted to wear his religious garment of Pastafarianism. And so Pastafarians, one of their religious garments is to wear a pasta colander or a pasta strainer on top of their heads. He wanted to wear that during his government photo, citing religious exemption. And he even provided scriptural reference of this religious obligation for his appeal to be able to wear a posture strainer on top of his head. The Austrian government denied Nico's request, saying that religious motives were not the reason to grant the permission of wearing a headgear on a passport photo. But however, Nico's initiative has since been replicated in several Western countries around the world, and they've all kind of received mixed reactions. Many national authorities have indeed granted driver's license or identity cards or passport photos featuring their citizens wearing posture strainers on their head. Some of those places include Germany, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Czech Republic, the Netherlands, Australia, and Ireland will allow someone to wear a posture colander on their head as a sign of religious clothing. Just Google it, and you'll see a whole plethora of people with colanders on top of their head. It's quite hilarious. Other authorities, however, rejected the applications on the ground that neither Pastafarianism was, quote, not a real religion, or they recognized the satirical nature of the ploy and their appeal. In 2016, a Nebraska inmate, Stephen Kavanaugh, sued the local prison, saying that it denied his ability to order and wear religious clothing and pendants on his body as an expression of his religious faith, which he confessed to be a Pastafarian. So he wanted to wear a colander on top of his head. Kavanaugh was denied, and he sued, and he argued that the prison was denying his First Amendment right. But however, the court had found Pastafarianism could not be defined as a religion under the Federal Penal Status Code, and thus the motion was dismissed because it legally wasn't defined as a recognized religion according to the penal codes. So even though the government would allow someone a photo ID of it, the penal codes did not define it as a religion. And the last series of challenges that I'm aware of to the religious status of Pastafarianism has come in the United States concerning marriage. And in 2014, in Minnesota, Michael Rogers is his name, who operated an online ordination service where people could become ordained ministers of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster in order to perform marriage ceremonies. The county, I think it was Washington County, denied these ordinations and licenses by these people ordained by the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster because they said this isn't a real religion. Rogers sued, arguing that by denying his ordination service, the government was unconstitutionally labeling one denomination religiously valued or valid over another. And so for denying his ordination services on the basis that FSM is not a religion according to them, Rogers was arguing that the government was therefore establishing a religion by saying his is not and others are. And so prior to the start of his trial in 2015, Washington County there reversed their decision and started recognizing ordination services because they knew they were going to lose in court. And so a similar challenge was done across the globe in 2016 in New Zealand, where the same thing happened as well. But however, the New Zealand recognized the marriage as legal, and couples from Australia were flying to New Zealand to get married and then flying back, trying to force Australia to recognize their marriage certificates, which were eventually were in 2018. And so this is how this internet phenomenon became kind of a recognized religion through parodies, but then as a countercultural movement. So the last two things that I want to talk about is what Pastafarians believe, so that we can talk about that. And then the last question being, are parody religions actually a religion? So the first is, what do Pastafarians believe? Bobby Henderson famously stated very early on in his teachings that the dogma of the church, that the only dogma that the church allowed is the rejection of dogma. Therefore, this part of our discussion concerning Pastafarianism and what they believe is really hard to do in terms of other religious traditions that we've talked about in this class. Really quickly, the term dogma here, if you're not familiar with it, dogma refers to a set of beliefs that is accepted as authoritative and true without without question, and that these beliefs are considered fundamental to a particular religion. That's dogma. So if there is no dogma, as Bobby Henderson has claimed, then there really is no set of beliefs for Pastafarians. So is Pastafarian a religion? However, one of the key characteristics of a parody religion is the purposeful mimicry and imitation of an established religion. Ergo, a parody religion like Pastafarianism purposefully mimics the core religious beliefs, teachings, and tenets of another religion in order to mock it. So, in this case, Pastafarianism is mimicking Christianity and other religious traditions. Um, uh, 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 yeah, I would say mimicking other Christian traditions that are utilizing intelligent design theories regarding creationism. So it's really a mimicking of the Abrahamic religious traditions, but I would argue really what Pastafarianism is really doing is just mimicking Christianity. But I think we can make it a little bit broader here as well. So most of what we would consider as the core tenets of Pastafarianism comes from three main documents that are considered scripture according to this parody religion. The first is Bobby Henderson's open letter to the Kansas State Board of Education in 2005. You can find that document online. It should be easily available. If not, I think Wikipedia has it online. And the other is, we've already talked about it, and you can see from the image here, the Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster that was published in 2006 by Bobby Henderson. And the other kind of book, if you first can say, is something that's loosely called the loose canon amongst Pastafarians and scholars who study parody religions as well. And that refers to a compilation of interviews and message board comments that Bobby Henderson himself made during the years of 2005 up until the end of this collection in 2010 that you have by some other prominent figures within the group as well. But the majority of them are Bobby's sayings very early on, but then later in 2010, you can see like that some other prominent members who kind of arose to be great challengers of traditional religion, um, and some of their comments and stuff like that. And while this parody religion does make various religious claims, we have to remember that all of these belief claims are purposefully comical. So, for example, like Pastafarianism claims to believe in a monotheistic, supreme creator deity known as the Flying Spaghetti Monster. And it's this celestial being that's literally made up of floating spaghetti pasta noodles and meatballs, and some pasta sauce. So it sort of looks like a crab or kind of looks like an octopus. You see different, versions of jellyfish sometimes. And that's what he is believed to look like, but again, he's invisible, so you can't see him. Pastafarianism teaches that the FSM created the universe in 6 days, including the creation of humanity on the last day. Pastafarian teaches that a great flood had indeed covered the earth, just like the Bible and the Quran states, as well as Hinduism states. However, this flood wasn't intentional, but actually accidental. According to Bobby Henderson, that the FSM monster was accidentally cooking some pasta and had boiled the water too, had too much, and he accidentally poured it out on the earth, and it ended up causing a flood. Pastafarianism also believes in heaven. It describes heaven as a beer volcano, which is always erupting cold and delicious and frothy beer. And every believer, once they die and go to this heaven, instantly receives a prostitute, male or female. There's no sexual preference here, and you have all the sexual delight that you can encounter. Pastafarianism also believes in a hell. However, its description is somewhat similar, that there is a volcano of beer, but it only spews out very stale and very warm beer. And that even though you get a prostitute, every prostitute has a sexually transmitted disease. So you really don't want to have sex with them. Or even if you do have sex with them, you're going to instantly regret it. So that's hell for them. But perhaps the most unique belief to the Pastafarians concerns pirates. And yes, the Johnny Depp kind of pirates that we're thinking of here. According to Pastafarian beliefs, pirates are, quote, absolute beings, and they believe that they are the original Pastafarians of the world until their extinction. Pastafarians believe that pirates were peace-loving explorers who spread the goodwill of the FSM to everyone, distributing small candy out to small children, and that it was only later that during the pre-modern period that pirates became demonized and became mischaracterized as thieves and outcasts by Christians who wished to discredit the achievements of Pastafarians and the legitimacy of their beliefs. Thus, pirates are celebrated within this parody religion, and its members are encouraged to celebrate what is known as International Talk Like a Pirate Day, which occurs on September 19th. That means every time you talk, you're supposed to say "arg" and use words like "ye mateys" and all that jazz. You're encouraged to dress up like a pirate and watch Pirates of the Caribbean movies on loop during that day. all of these these things that pastafarians believe are mimics. They're mimic beliefs, and they're purposely crafted in order to make fun of organized religion, especially Christianity. However, there are two beliefs that I do want us to talk about and spend significant time highlighting it. One of them is called the omphalos hypothesis. The omphalos hypothesis was first proposed by Philip Henry Gossi in 1857, and this is a creationist style argument that suggests that the earth was created with the appearance of age, that the earth was created purposefully to have fossils and geological formations and other evidence of an old and evolving earth, but still being a relatively new and young earth development in the accordance of the book of Genesis. This belief this hypothesis we call the young earth creationist, or the young earth creationist movement, but it had its origin within the omphalos hypothesis. Gossi argued that the world was created by God and by the God of Christianity to be functional, meaning that God must have created the earth with age, like fully formed mountains, canyons, rivers, fully grown trees with rings around them, and that Adam and Eve themselves were created fully grown and with age and evolutionary development. The Bible says that God created the universe perfectly and that his creation was instantly called good by God upon every time. And Gossi argues that time perfects all things, and that maturity requires the passage of time. Ergo, the world was created with the sign of maturity already in place, which explains why the world looks older than it really is. And you might be wondering, what does ophelos have to do with this hypothesis? Well, ophelos comes from the Greek word meaning belly button. So what does belly button have to do with this hypothesis? Well, it deals with the idea of this debate within Christianity and Judaism to some extent too. The debate was, did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? A belly button is a function or a result of being born from the womb and having an umbilical cord, and that umbilical cord being cut, and the way the doctor ties the umbilical cord at the end is the way you either have an innie or an outie belly button. But the belly button is a sign of the womb. So if Adam and Eve were created by God, did they have, and not from the womb, did they have belly buttons? Gossi would argue, yes, they had belly buttons, just like we had belly buttons, because they were formed with maturity and formed out of creation. So that name kind of sticks. However, it is important to note here that Gossi refused to address the idea of fossils and fossils of animals which no longer exist because they didn't fit in his narrative. Why would God create something, a fossil of an animal that no longer exists? Like, what's the purpose of that? But Gossi didn't address that. He didn't simply say that fossils are preserved animals that were destroyed from the flood. He just refused to address it altogether because he saw it was kind of problematic. Today, intelligent designers or creationists use Gossi's hypothesis all the time to defend a biblical literalist view, rationalizing both science and religion together. So, for example, if you go to Ken Ham's exhibit in the Creation Museum in Kentucky, you will see Gossie's hypothesis fully on display. And if you hear public debates given by Ken Ham against evolutionists like Bill Nye, the science guy, you will hear Gossie's hypothesis being described in the debate. It's very popular. However, it's been largely disproven by science. While the concept is unverifiable, the problem is that the concept is also unfalsifiable as well, because through any conceivable scientific study, meaning it's impossible to conclude the truth of the hypothesis since it requires empirical data that has already been arbitrarily created to look a certain way. Thus, you can't prove or verify the hypothesis. Bobby Henderson uses the Omphalos hypothesis when constructing his own teachings of the flying spaghetti monster. He argues that the FSM purposely created the world to be much older than it really is, or that the presence of fossils were intentionally placed by the FSM in order to, quote, test the faithful. That even if science says the world is much older than 6,000 years old, it is purposely misdirection by the flying spaghetti monster in order to test the faith of the faithful, but also to rally them to fight back against false evidences of science. And so that's the Omphalos hypothesis. The second key piece of the teaching of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster is that correlation does not imply causation. So what do I mean by this? This is an example of what is known as a questionable cause logical fallacy. So let me repeat that again. A questionable cause logical fallacy, in which two events occurring together are believed to have a cause and effect relationship purely on the basis of observed association. Meaning, well, the sky is gray and it's raining, ergo, gray clouds produce rain. It's an observational association. I observe gray clouds in the sky, the ergo, they must, and it's raining right now, ergo, rain comes from gray clouds. So now, cause and effect relationships can be empirically true, just like that. Gray clouds can produce rain. But a better example of that would be Newton's third law of motion, which states that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, meaning that when one object exerts a force on another object, the second object exerts a force back on the first object that is equal in magnitude but opposite in direction. So an example of this is the mechanics of a rocket engine. When a rocket expels hot gas from its nozzle, the gas exerts a force on the rocket and an equal and opposite force of gravity on the rocket, which propels it up when the gases are pushing it down and pushing it out. However, while some cause and effects relationships can be empirically true, not all cause and effects relationships are empirically true. A crude example of this would be dinosaurs never learned how to read, and now they're extinct. Therefore, there's a direct correlation between illiteracy rates and species extinction rates. Now, that example is quite laughable. However, it does serve our point here because there are two empirical facts going on. Dinosaurs cannot read, and dinosaurs as a species is extinct. Those are two empirical facts. But because they're they have an observed association, It does not mean that there is a direct correlation between the variables, meaning doesn't mean that there's a direct cause and effect relationship. In Bobby Henderson's letter to Kansas State Board of Education, he pointed out that much of the scientific evidence for the intelligent design view of creation overtly relies on cause and effect relationships, and cause and effect relationship arguments regarding the outcome versus the data. Meaning, because I believe in intelligent design theory of creation, I then go out and look for data which supports my theory of creation by an intelligent design. A great example of this is the fine-tuning argument for the universe. So this was first proposed by Lawrence Joseph Henderson in 1913 and later had been perfected by Fred Hoyle in 1983. This hypothesis states that if the constant variables of the Earth's existence in space were to change, like the Earth's axis tilting a few degrees more or less from the constant 23.5 degree angle that the Earth exists today, then life as we know it cannot exist. The fine-tuning argument is a perfect example of the intelligent design argument and is used all the time because look how ingenious this is. That the Earth is suspended in such a way that life exists. That this can't happen circumstance. This has to be happen intentionally because it speaks to complexity. And complexity is the design of a designer, not a design of accident and randomness. So again, the fine-tuning argument is used heavily by proponents of the intelligent design theory, arguing that the universe seems to be finely tuned for life is an incredible, improbable coincidence. And again, suggests the more likely idea is that there's a designer, an intentional designer who's intentionally set these constraints in place in order to maintain these constants in order to allow life to exist and continue to exist. Makes sense. However, Henderson and other scientists have pointed out the anthropic principle, which suggests that we should not be surprised to find ourselves in a universe that is conducive to life, as we would not be here in order to observe it otherwise. In other words, our existence itself biases our own observations of the universe, meaning that the fine-tuning argument is looking for data in order to validate a pre-established belief, a fallacy of the cause and effect relationship. Now, to demonstrate this point further, Henderson famously he asserted his example of a cause and effect relationship by proclaiming his own parody religious belief regarding pirates. So again, according to Pastafarians, pirates were the first believers of the Flying Spaghetti Monster's message and were his first chosen people on earth, just like the Jews of the Bible. Pastafarians believe that there was once a golden age of the earth when pirates sailed the high seas, that they lived life to the fullest, and that they were spreading the message of joy of the FSM to all of the earth. They believe also in modern history and the church, and has blatantly corrupted our vision and expectations of pirates today by depicting them as thieves, marauders, outcasts of good society, hiding us from the real truth about pirates and the real truth and history of our earth today. Pastafarians teach um, that it was a non-believer named Noah who began attacking pirates and forcing them to go into hiding. Pastafarians believe that the church covered up the true story and character of Noah by creating this Noah's Ark story in order to make him a savior-like figure rather than exposing the work he did of ridding the earth of pirates. But for this cause and effect relationship, Pastafarians believe that the declining number of pirates is not only the result of religious persecution, um, well, yeah. I'm trying to word this correctly. So yeah, let me rephrase it this way. So what does pirates have to do with cause and effect? Bobby Henderson famously argued that the decline of pirates in the world has a direct cause and effect relationship and causality to the rise of global warming. So just let that sink in. Because there's less pirates in the world today, we have greater threat of global warming. That sounds ridiculous, and it should. But Bobby brought evidence. He brought charts and data from Somalia, which showed empirical fact that because Somalia, since the early 2000s, has had increase in levels of piracy and activity in the Gulf of Aden, that particular region shows the lowest levels of recorded effects of global warming across the globe. Because there's more pirates in the Gulf of Aden, and that's that land between Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Africa, the kind of that tip of Africa that extends out. That because of the pirate activity there is a direct correlation to global warming. The more pirates, the less global warming. You come to the United States where there's less pirates, higher global warming levels. Ergo, the presence of pirates has a direct correlation to global warming effects. That's ridiculous, right? But he had the data, empirical data showing it, actual numbers from multiple UN studies and stuff like that. But he just put random things together. Again, observational biases here. So one final point here regarding Bobby Henderson's challenge and claims regarding intelligent design in the classroom. Concurrently, as Henderson was challenging the state of Kansas, a similar challenge was occurring in Dover, Pennsylvania, where a local school board was attempting to force their teachers to lecture on intelligent design as a well-tested explanation for the origin of life, like Darwinism, and was categorically flawed and needed abandoning. The problem is not what they are saying about Darwinism, it is that it is flawed. Rather, that intelligent design is not flawed and in fact infallible, that it's the only replacement theory for life in the origins of life. Science as a discipline, it's an open-minded, open to opportunities for falsification, experiments, testing, the scientific method. It does produce a knowledge base that is constantly changing, but the problem is that the Dover Area School District in the state of Kansas was saying that you can only have one mind on the origins of life, and that mind is intelligent design. And that knowledge base cannot change. What Bobby Henderson was pointing out was that doesn't sound like a religion. Or doesn't sound like science. That sounds like a religion. And if I could simplify it, science has the power to challenge our taken for granted assumptions, where religion has the power to maintain and reinforce our assumptions while refuting challenges to our assumptions. Also, it was found that the Dover area school district was using Discovery Institute textbooks, just like state of Kansas. So a concerned parent, name was Tammy Kitzmiller, sued the school district along with 10 other parents, and the case became known as Kitzmiller versus Dover in 2005. In that case, Judge John Jones, who was a Republican and appointed by President George W. Bush, ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, the 11 parents, saying that, quote, the required teaching of intelligent design in public school was impermissible because it was nothing less than the progeny of creationist theories and the promotion of the Christian religion. The Dover mandate is unconstitutional, and the school board's policy violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Thus, Bobby Henderson's point regarding intelligent design was clearly demonstrated and recognizable for others to see, including the federal government. The teaching of intelligent design in the classroom is a way to enforce Christian values and Christian beliefs on Americans. And so, Pastafarianism and much of its beliefs were created as a way to not only mock, but challenge those Christian beliefs. The last thing that I want to talk about is this question, this one question that remains from this lecture. Are parody religions a religion? The inherent question within this much larger and greater question that we're sort of discussing at the beginning of all of this lecture series that we have done so far is what makes a religion a religion. As we have discussed at the beginning, we asked, are religions defined and classified and characterized by a belief in supernatural agency? Can we make a simple definition that religion is the belief in the supernatural? And you may resoundingly answer yes to that question. And you could provide a mountain of evidence from just the lecture materials that we have gone over this semester. The Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam actively confess to and are overwhelmingly characterized by monotheistic belief in one supreme deity. The West African traditions, or Zoroastrianism, believes in a multitude number of supernatural agents and deities who are active in the daily lives of us in our world today. The dharmic religions of Hinduism and Sikhism do for sure believe in a supernatural deity, and one could make the argument for a broad inclusion of Buddhism and Jainism with their beliefs surrounding the Bohavistas and the Tirharkanoks. In fact, it seems that no religious tradition that we have covered did not believe in some kind of supernatural agency and have some theological and cosmological explanation for their beliefs, from Shinto all the way to Scientology. So what about parody religions then? What about Pastafarianism? Does it not publicly profess the belief in supernatural deity, the flying spaghetti monster? Does that belief then necessitate us in classifying, categorizing, and defining Pastafarianism as a religion? I think the answer is no. Pastafarianism and parody religions are not a religion to me. And why is that? So, before we talk about that, I think there is an inherent problem within parody religions like Pastafarianism. In order to be a true parody of a recognized religion, they have to consciously and purposefully exhibit many of the core characteristics that we naturally associate with recognized religions. On paper and by public profession, parody religions have a belief system. They have rituals. They have external customs just like other recognized religions. And on paper and by profession, when you look at parody religions as a federal judge or as a government, you can say that they are not a religion. Just think back to the previous examples that we have discussed. Or you could say they are a religion, like in Templeton, Germany, where the local government believed that Pastafarian was a religion and should be protected as a religion and have the same rights as other religions. And later, the federal courts there in Germany would make the same decision. But you had the regional courts and the regional government who rejected it, saying no. Why did the federal courts and the local governments disagree? Why is that? Because on paper, it looks like a religion. Because of public profession, it sounds like a religion. However, that's not how reality works. So, how does it work? I believe we can answer this question with a couple of examples and discussions. Um, let us look at one example that I can think of here. Example of, do you believe in ghosts? Every culture that I'm aware of has an idea regarding ghosts. And broadly speaking, a ghost refers to the spirit of a deceased person who we believe are able to appear to the living. However, each culture has a different reason as to why a ghost appears and for what purpose. But every culture has a belief and an explanation about ghosts. So, is this belief about ghosts a religion? Ghosts are a supernatural agent, right? That fits our broad definition of religion. Well, by itself, no. Ancestry worship is a common and very old religious practice venerating deceased family members. However, the practice is generally part of a much larger system of beliefs, and it's rarely the main source of belief. Um, However, according to IPSOS polls or Ipsos polls that were taking from 2019, 46% of Americans believe in ghosts. That's up from 14% in 2005, and that's up from 21% in 1993. At the same time, those same Ipsos polls we're showing that Americans' religiosity has gone down along the same trend lines, which is interesting. More and more Americans are less religious, but yet more and more Americans believe in ghosts. Yet those who believe in a ghost do not say they're religious, nor would they consider themselves or consider their beliefs in ghosts as being a part of religion. Yet, what do we call this belief in ghosts? We call it a superstition. We don't call it a religion. We call it a superstition. So why is this belief in ghosts regulated to superstition and not a part of a religious belief? Let me reframe the question differently. What is the difference between the belief in ghosts and the belief in deceased saints, or the belief in the apparition of saints, or the appearance of Mary, the Virgin Mary in Catholicism? What's the difference between the two? Why is one belief a superstition and the other belief a religion? A similar argument could be made between magic and religion. Why is magic not a religion, and why is religion not magic? Both realms believe in supernatural agency. Both realms have rituals. Both realms have liturgies. Both realms have spells and charms and prayers. But why are they treated and classified differently? Religious scholars of the 19th century analyzed and actually debated this specific issue here. So back to our friend Emil Durkheim. Durkheim said that the difference between magic and religion is that, quote, there is no church of magic, meaning that magic does not create what Durkheim called collective effervescence, meaning a powerful force of synergy when individuals gather together in a shared experiences. Magic doesn't create community, is what he's saying. Religion does. Creates churches, creates synagogues, creates mosques, creates religious groups, denominations, sects, cults. Magic doesn't do that. James Frazer argued that, well, the difference between magic and religion comes down to the locus and the ultimate purpose of the two. Magic looks to manipulate the supernatural for individual or collective benefit, while religion looks to appease the supernatural in order to convince the supernatural in order to act in a gracious manner towards me, the individual, or the collective. So it's the difference between manipulation and control. While these two men are geniuses, I don't think that these men are ultimately correct in their distinction between magic and religion. Rather, what I believe is the determining factor between religion and magic, and ghost and magic, or parody religions and religion, I believe the answer is, what does culture say? What does culture say? If you recall from our very first lecture, our conversation regarding the two flags, which one was the actual American flag, if you remember our conversation, it was culture that has the deciding voice of what is considered our American flag. And again, if I put out the original wording of the 1777 Flag Act and just modify it for our today's culture. So resolved that the flag of the United States be 13 stripes, alternating red and white, that the Union be instead of 13 stars originally, but now 50 stars, and a blue field representing a new constellation. When I pull up these images of the two flags, and I ask the audience which one to select, which one is the real American flag, the audience picks the one on the right every time. And then I ask them, well, why not pick the one on the left? It fits the definition. Let me read it one more time. That the flag of the United States be 13 stripes, alternated red and white. And that the Union be 50 stars, white in a blue field representing a new constellation. So again, why the one on the left is not the American flag? I see 13 red and white stripes alternating between each other. I see a constellation of 50 stars, white on a blue field. It fits the definition to a T. So why is it wrong? One word: culture. Our collective American culture says no to one option and yes to the other option. So if you think back to other examples of what we discussed, where the legitimacy of Pastafarianism as a recognized religion was debated and ultimately declared no, why and how did these judges and governments and societies make this decision? I would argue that they looked beyond what was on the paper. They looked beyond the public professions of the group, and they looked at the purpose and the intentions of Pastafarianism. Again, what is the purpose of a parody? A parody is a purposeful imitation. It's designed to look like the object it's intimidating. That decision making is dependent upon culture. Knowing and seeing what the parody religion is doing and respond accordingly. I think the final point here that we can gather from this topic and that we should keep in mind as we end our lectures on religion is that what religion and culture have is that they have an interconnective relationship with each other. As demonstrated, religion is largely categorized, defined, and legitimized by culture. And in turn, religion functions very much the same way for culture, categorizing, defining it, and legitimizing culture. It cannot be denied that Western civilization and that American society has been and continues to be shaped by Christianity. And that the struggles we see in these societies are the remnants of a struggle between religion and culture, between Christianity and pluralism, between the church and secularization and modernization. Bobby Henderson's Parody religion was a grand reflection of that struggle. And it was a societal commentary, a social commentary on the battle between culture and religion. And his fear, and the fears of others, is that religion had too much power over culture, and they wished for the position to be reversed. And so it's thus why I think parody religions are very important for our discussion on world religion, because it forces us to look at culture and the role religion plays in shaping and defining and maybe controlling our culture.